Thank you. All right, so I'm Kevin, a graduate student in the MBA program here, and it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Jeffrey Finch. And as you mentioned, the importance of education, I find, is really a nice tie-in to the talk this morning from Vice President Pence, because there are so many opportunities for our faith and our morals to kind of headbutt with the education system today, and trying to figure out how you lead an organization or a school district through those decisions in a way that isn't compromising your faith or your personal morals. So I think that is something that's incredibly valuable to us, to continue to see the struggles there and learn from other people's experiences, and be able to really glean wisdom on how you lead through it, what kind of personal practices you put in place to be able to make sure that you're sharp and that you can be aware of where is that line and know when it's going to get crossed, and how you can shape your organization to navigate through that. So a little bit about Dr. Finch. He began his tenure as superintendent with the Grove City Area School District back in January of 16. Since that time of his arrival, he's focused his efforts on building relationships with members of our school and community, as well as working to establish new support systems for the district. Dr. Finch has participated in several local boards and committees for regional development and educational partnerships, and he's also worked to reintegrate the Office of Assistant Superintendent and to develop a new department of pupil services. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Finch.
Does this work?
I'll get it better for you.
There you go. Thank you. Yep. Yeah, I'm not on the tall guy setting. All right, well, hello. First of all, let's talk about the elephant in the room, at least the elephant that I saw when I came in the room, and that is, what in the world is Jeff Finch on this list for? Which is pretty much what my wife said last night when she asked, the conversation, anything special going on tomorrow? And I said, well, I'm speaking over at the college, but look at the lineup. And she called me a liar, and she said, why? And I said, I don't really know, but Christy Crute has been, I'd say, a champion, not just for the school district, but for me since the time that we've met. Her background and her confidence in the things that she leads has been something that I've appreciated she's shared with me by expressing some belief and confidence in some of the things that I've been trying to do here in this community and with our district. And so to that point about not just why me, but why a public school district superintendent in a leadership summit. I'll back up a little bit because I recognize some of the faces here. For the last couple of years, the context was a little bit different, but in prior years, I think as part of the summit, I sat on a panel with some other local business leaders. And I found that to be very, not only rewarding, but it gave me a little bit more strength in a perspective that in sharing with other business leaders, to students, particularly in higher ed, and focusing on business, that schools are important businesses, and they are important in so many ways. For starters, when you grow up, we all grow up going to school somehow, some way. So I guess we all think we're experts in education because we sat from at least one point of view through a long time. But when you end up in a position like mine, it wears on you a bit when people, particularly in business, say, well, in the real world, this happens. And I always think to myself, schools are in the real world. We're here. And so I'd like to present a context to what I want to share today. Is why do business leaders need to consider making a much greater investment, not just financial investment, but an investment in their involvement, an investment in their insight, an investment in their shared responsibility in schools? Why do business leaders need to not look back on schools as something they did when they were a child and not something that they need to continue to be a part of as an adult, particularly as an adult who understands the economy? So in those conversations, sitting next to some other CEOs, I believed myself when I said, well, how many $45 million a year businesses are in Grove City? And there's a few, but not a lot. And our school's one of them. How many business owners employ over 300 employees? There are some, but not a lot in Grove City. And that's what a superintendent runs in this community of now a little less than 2,000 kids in a 90-ish square mile range. And the scope of services that are provided is what I'm going to challenge you to start to think about as I talk to you, is what do you think a school does? And then break that thought up to, what do you think a school does when you think back 10, 20, 30 years? Now challenge yourself to think about, what are you aware of that a school does now? And has that changed and grown? So some of you that are Christie students may have been given an article that I shared as a pre-reading, and it's called Public Schools for Private Gain: The Declining American Commitment to Serving the Public Good. And I'm not taking position with all points in that if you happen to read it, and if you didn't and you're interested, I could share it. But the context to this is, in my hope, pointing towards what is the primary purpose of public school in our state and in our country. Think about that for a moment. Maybe take just a minute. This is the educator in me. We call it turn and talk, engage the audience. But before we say it out loud, I want you to frame this response in your head and then share it with somebody next to you. What is the purpose, and this is the key, of a publicly funded education system? Not just what is the purpose. What qualifies that we pay for it out of public funds? And to make it even a little more powerful, in a free country where we don't need laws to do anything, but we only need laws to say the things you can't do for the most part, right? If we're truly free, we don't need laws. So what is the purpose of a publicly funded school system? And what qualifies that we have laws that say everybody's kid has to participate in some form of education in a range of time that's supposed to meet a certain set of criteria? So why do we say that as a country we force everybody to participate in education? And why do we make our biggest arm of education paid for by the public? Think about that and share with somebody next to you. What's its purpose and why should it be so? All right, so as you wrap up your final thoughts, I just want to point something out from this point of view. Is I love it when I ask a group, what's the purpose of public education? And I think part of what I'm seeing is, oh crap, I don't know. You know, like, is there a definitive answer to that? So can somebody share, to start with, what do you think the purpose of a publicly funded education system is, or at least should be? Yes?
I said to educate students.
Yeah, it's. I hope that's in there.
So we came up with what it is, not what it should be, but to create the next generation of workers to fuel the economy.
Fair. Yeah. Especially as business owners, right? You're very concerned about sustainability of whatever it is that you make or do. What else? How does that change a little bit when I say, how do we qualify the law that everybody's child has to participate in an education program?
I said to prepare students for a basic understanding of how to learn.
I like that, to prepare students for basic understanding of how to learn. So you're talking about the skills of being a learner. In education, we call that building learner agency. Being an agent of your own learning. Discovering at some point in your life that you're the greatest force in learning.
We need to keep in perspective how privileged we are to live here in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
We are the most comfortable society ever to live on this planet. And I think education needs to help our students, help our young people, further that into the future so that the next generation can feel the same as I do
Mm-hmm.
about how fortunate we are to live here. So if we miss that perspective on furthering how wonderful we have it already, we're really missing the boat on our kids.
I think you're talking about another form of sustainability. Is we're the most comfortable nation. Are we going to remain the most comfortable nation?
Exactly.
So those of you that may have taken a peek at that article that I sent out, I'm going to pull a piece of it out. I don't know how many of you know who Horace Mann is. But Horace Mann is known to be the father of our public education system. And he has a lot of quotes. But in that article, there's one where Horace Mann, I think it's in 1841, says, and this is paraphrasing this part, it's relatively easy to form a republic, or form of governance, or governance structure. But it's far more tedious to create republicans. And I don't think he was talking about republicans versus Democrats, right? Members of the Society of the Republic. Think about it. What do you think he meant when he said it's far more tedious to create republicans? And think of some of the answers that we got from helping an individual have the agency to continuously learn, the sustainability, to teach people things. But what we didn't touch on is the purpose. You're talking about the things we do. I'm talking about the why, the purpose, the why behind that purpose. And back to Horace Mann. It's far more tedious to create republicans. Yes?
Well, I mean, the word responsibility comes to mind. That, to be a Republican is to be responsible. And so, the idea that education is going to make somebody responsible, at least I don't think practical. It comes from the family. It comes from the individual and their core relationship.
And that's a great segue to part that's going to come up. Yes, behind Peter there.
I'm sorry, I wanted to kind of follow that up. Well, so my wife, she was doing a lot of research on the public school versus private school versus homeschool, and one of the points that she had run into was the concept that, you could homeschool your kid or you could put them on a yellow bus that takes them away for 8 hours of the day. And so the counterpoint that I would want to offer to you, Peter, is the concept that if we're going to give the majority of our hours of our children's day to a public school or to a public environment, then we really should be attempting to teach them responsibility in a public area rather than relying on the family core, because they're giving 40 or something, a substantial amount of hours a week to that school where they're being more or less brought up in their like best daytime hours. I'm curious actually what your thought is on that.
Well, it's interesting because school gets real messy since 1841. There are some principles that underlie all this that I'm trying to get your thinking towards. But then the hows, the different ways of doing things become very complicated, and then we lose sight of those principles. And when we don't achieve those goals, those principles, it's not as simple as saying that, homeschooling doesn't work, because here's an example where it didn't. Because we all know there's plenty of examples when public schooling doesn't work, if you look at it individual to individual, right? So it's back to the whys. Horace Mann said, it's relatively easy to form a republic, it's far more tedious to create republicans. So fill in the blanks. We are a governance system that is governed for the what? The people, by the people. So we're talking about a governance system that is supposed to rely on the power of the citizens. It's the antithesis of the monarchy, right? I mean, here's another one. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. You want to bring religion into it? Ask why. For so many centuries, that the leaders of organized religion, way back, made it a crime to translate the Bible. What were they trying to hold on to? The power. That's why in dictatorships, they oppose education for everyone, because knowledge is power. And the basis of our governance system is to share the power with the people. And what did Horace Mann mean when he said, it's far more tedious to create republicans? And make the tie. He's the father of public education. It was that. Why? What is the purpose of public school? You want to make it as few words as possible? Civic duty to fulfill the mission of our governance structure was to be governed by us. And here's the key, all of us. And so education is necessary. An educated populace is necessary. It also at times can appear to be threatening, because then people have their own ideas. But the process continues with the democracy part of it, is we have to accept that we're all a part of it, and we have to find our way to coexist, share our ideas, and find mutual understanding and agreement, right? And so in running a business, we all learn about leadership strategies of things like shared leadership. We heard it today. Empower the people around you. Get the strength of many horses, not just one. And so when Horace Mann said that, I think it tilts towards that idea of what he was doing when he was trying to promote the idea of, at the time, it wasn't even called a public school, it was called common schools. It was common. It was before the word equity became taboo and twisted into a bunch of other stuff. It was that everybody matters. Everybody matters, whether you like it or not. And we need a commonality of education. Because the purpose of public school, I would argue, is to sustain our form of governance. And that brings the question to, is our public school system qualified to be publicly funded if it is being contorted into for individual gain or private gain? I'm not talking about are private schools better than public schools. I'm talking about the rule you have to be in a school. Hopefully there's a standard to them being good ones. And we're using public dollars to pay for it. So that notion that everybody matters, what about the aspect of what is a school, or what is public school's role in a nation's economy? So when Horace Mann said that, and he put forth the common schools. What he was saying is that we're not actually doing it for you, any one of you. When we go to school and we want to take care of the child, which is the right thing to do, to meet the child where they need to be met, to walk the pathway of learning, till hopefully by the time we release them, they have learner agency to continue to learn for the rest of their life, to be their own agent of learning. It doesn't mean they don't seek help in higher ed. It means that they have a drive and an intrinsic motivation to be a learner, and they understand what it is to demonstrate the skills and dispositions of a learner. That is our goal, our outcome that we want. But the why is because all citizens are going to affect the nation, either as a positive or a negative, like it or not. So we have people in our country, and if you think every one of them doesn't matter, if you want to build the strongest economy in the world, do you want every individual to produce more than they consume? And the answer to that is obviously yes. And I'm not talking about fruits and vegetables. But to contribute more in than they themselves take out. Yes. And for everyone that can't meet that threshold, what do they contribute to the economy? A minus. And you can't wish them away. Quite the opposite. If you leave them to be ill-equipped, there's still going to be a minus. And they're going to make more minuses. You get the whole begets. You know, this begets it more. That's why it matters. And that's why it's publicly funded. Horace Mann went on to say, "And woe the republic that rests on the foundations of ignorance, selfishness, and pride." Think about those three words: ignorance, selfishness, and pride. When I hear them, I think, pride doesn't necessarily sound like a negative, unless it's used and applied the wrong way. But ignorance and selfishness, those are easy, right? They sound bad, negative. Flip them around. What happens if you find yourself in a climate where people seem to be prideful of their selfishly motivated ignorance? Sound familiar? Prideful of selfishly motivated ignorance. Ignorance isn't the same as being unintelligent. And so that selfish piece of it, this is 1841, and I'm imagining if Horace Mann can watch the last 2 months of television and ads, political ads, like just raw ignorance of people latching onto it out of their selfish motivations. And selfish isn't always just being stingy. Sometimes selfishness comes out of fear. I selfishly do not want to be in a position of fear. I want to protect myself. And then you jump on that bandwagon of being boastful about it. And things can really deteriorate quickly. And every one of those commercials, my wife got sick of hearing it. I'm like, she's like, "I know, Jeff, you know what Horace Mann said." And I'm like, it's like, he got it right. And so to schools, in public schools, I think we have to face that there are very well-educated people in this room. And we all struggled with being certain that we could say that we know what public schools' purpose is. And I find that in room after room, in crowd after crowd, over and over and over again. And if they want to sterilize it a bit, it's teaching and learning is what it's for. It is for building a society of citizens that can sustain a self-governance model. It's about building a society that can contribute individually more than they take, so they can build a strong economy and become globally sustainable. And make no mistake, there is no motivator greater than the need to survive. So if you want to know about our education system in the United States, there are at least 26 nations outperforming us in education. And you can question those metrics, things like the PISA exams and whatnot. But you look at societies like Singapore, and you can come up with a lot of reasons why you can't compare the United States to Singapore, and you can say, I'd much rather live in the United States than Singapore. But if you look at their current education model and look at its point of inception, it's much more current than ours. And what did it come from? It came from desperation. The midbrain is a powerful force, and it'll outcompete your frontal lobe any day of the week if it's threatened. You could logically compel yourself to do a lot of things, but I dare yourself to logically compel yourself to not breathe. You can't do it. Midbrain controls survival. And when people are desperate, when people feel that they have nothing to lose, survival kicks in. And if you know the history of Singapore, they were a desperate nation. And the key to their strength and success over time was their commitment to education, to educate everybody. And it's a myth if you think that they don't educate everybody, because they do. And they had a more modern startup. They were looking forward while we were still looking backwards. And it's not just Singapore or Shanghai. It's the Netherlands, Finland, New Zealand. You want to know one that's outpaced us handedly? Is Estonia. British Columbia. The list goes on and on. And part of the reason that it's occurred is because of, I'm not even going to attempt to explain an economic trend because I know and understand as well as the people in this here, but that slow wave economic trend of when a group, organization, or nation is high, it is a slow decline. And in theory, it's often they don't see the decline until they're well on the way of it. And then, how low do you need to go to get desperate? And do you need desperation to compel change? And so that's that slow economic trend. And we've been on that decline for a long time. Because I asked you to think about the purpose of public education. Now I want you to think about the structure of public education. And ask yourself, how much sense does this make? I'd say just about everybody in this room went to school, and some of us further back than others, or can relate to the structural arrangement of a classroom. Desks in rows. Whose job is it to come with the plan every day? The teachers. We grew up in compliance-based models. This was based on our arrival on the world stage out of the Great Depression and in the Second World War and our strength in industry. The industrial model at the time did not favor shared creativity, did it? It was mass production, uniformity. So in the biggest employment rates and labor needs of our country were the people on the line. The creative elements were up in the crow's nest. If somebody on the line tried to get creative, there was a risk that they would change what they were doing and it wouldn't fit. Now think of your experience in school. When do you know when you're allowed to get up and walk out? When the bell rings, right? Who do you have to ask if you're allowed to think differently or do something? The teacher. Matter of fact, do you even try to come in creatively thinking about it? No, you're waiting for the teacher to tell you what to do. And it was a compliance-based model, and it's still lingering, but it worked so well because it matched what we needed in our labor force. And then a selective group went on to higher education. And there were some disruptors in that. They created new businesses and things, but they were creating and thinking of the drones that were behind them. And not knocking Horace Mann's plan, they were functional people. They were contributing citizens in an economic need at the time that worked for. But that structure lingers now. But what do employers need? When we hear people like the Winklevoss twins, it was another one of those moments when I think, I wish I could be young again, but only if it's back when I was young. I don't want to be young now because I don't know what they were talking about. And that scares me. But you just got a demonstration of like crazy, wild, creative thinking. And I believe them. And so employer after employer is saying, I need people. I don't just need learner agency. I need self-agency. I need people that know how to discover new things. I want to encourage creativity. I want to share the leadership. Fewer and fewer are the organizations that want to hoard the leadership to one or two people and put all their eggs in that basket. And more are those that want to share it. And how do you make sharing it worthwhile? You share the wealth with it. So this old model that we have has been on this slow wave, and all these other nations are personalizing learning. They're fostering creativity. But there's a very similar why underneath it. They want productive citizens. So I think we have a sense of our why, and we'll simplify it with civic duty. Our civic duty is to contribute to our nation's sustainability. That's our civic duty. And that's why it's justified that it's paid for out of public dollars. Now, things got really messy. Now, we have the rule to go to school, but there's not really a quality gauge on whether or not a lot of good stuff happens. And what I'm saying to you as business leaders is you need to be worried about that. If you believe that every individual affects the whole, and you believe that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, then every unnecessary minus, as far as that meeting the threshold of contributing more than you take, is not only a failure, it's a problem. And I would say, to the purpose of school, the outcome should be constantly striving to help every individual child reach their fullest potential, whatever that may be. You cannot accept a system that knowingly neglects that effort. And so, the functions of school that I ask you to think about is, what do schools actually do? I want to read for you something out of our, anybody, I don't know how many people are in education in this room. When we talk about the Pennsylvania State Code for Education, the laws and regulations that govern schools, does anybody know the year that it's stamped on it? The code of, yes? 660s? Oh, no, it's older than that. That's when you know you're in a room full of educators, because they all say the State Code of 1949. 1949, which was barely a rewrite of the post-Civil War era. But it stands today. I'm going to read from you a section from Chapter 4 of the State Code of 1949. And it's the only one I can find that has these words in its heading. Purpose of public education. So it's another question I was going to ask you, but the looks on your faces, I didn't. Was where would you go to look to find the answer to that question? I don't know. But this is what it says in the code. It's in Chapter 11, 4.11, Purpose of Public Education. Public schools provide instruction throughout the curriculum so that students may develop knowledge and skills in the following areas. And there's now 10 of them. And this gets some modification annually in state code bills. There's things that are updated. There's not been a whole rewrite of it. And on January 11th of 2024, there was a 10th one added to this list, and that's personal finance. And there's a lot of businesses, they drove that. We need our kids to understand personal finance. Fair. But this is what we've done to education. The purpose is public schools provide instruction throughout the curriculum so that students may develop knowledge and skills in English, math, science, technology, social studies, arts and humanities, career ed, health, safety, and physical education, family and consumer science, and personal finance now arrived. So what's the problem with that? Nothing, if you acknowledge it's only a piece of it. That is a very simple description of what I've tried to introduce. And what has changed dramatically is what actually is going on in schools. If that were it, everybody would have a much more positive view on education, because that would be all that we were doing. But that is not it. And so what I want to bring to light is there are two systems. There's one large system at play, and it's the system of human development. So back it up again. We want to help every individual in our nation reach their full potential. And it's not for them individually. It's not that it can't be shared to their prosperity as an individual by any means. I mean, it absolutely can. But it is taboo to be in my job and say that the priority is not the child. The purpose is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. But you got to take care of the child and fulfill their needs to grow them to their fullest potential. And so it's like a catch-22. That greater system is called the human development system. And the human development system houses, as a big part of it, a subsystem, which is the education system. And in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, it was aligned. And I can't see your name behind Peter there, but it's kind of what you were saying about in the household. Our industrial model is not the only thing that changed. Our economic base is not the only thing that changed. The competition around the world is not the only thing that changed. Our home structure has changed. And I'd be very careful, if you talk about this with somebody, to imply the self-righteous view that a home that can't raise their child wholly is a bad home. When we live in an economy that not only expects, but potentially demands that a lot of homes, both a mother and a father work. And you as employers, you need that. You need that workforce, right? So let's think of the difference post-Depression, what framed the model of our school, and also now think currently the change in the home. Parents work. And so without getting too deep into it, what do you think has the greatest influence as far as developmental period in age or age ranges? Where do you think the greatest influence, or to put it in business terms, highest return on the dollar is spent when spent on education and care? From birth through adolescence. Anybody want to take a shot? Where's the highest return on investment?
1 to 4.
Birth to 4. So in those years, and where does our education system by mandate start? What age? In PA, 6 to 18. So there's one lesson. It's not a hard one to find the research on. All those nations that outperform us have a much higher or much greater arrival of early child supports, which if you're not careful how you talk about it, can sound socialist. Like whether or not you can afford it, we're going to pay for your preschool. Actually, in many of these nations, not just nations like Singapore, mandated maternity leave, supported paternity leave. Nations like Estonia in Singapore, there is no reason to need outside support before a child's 1.5 years old, because their government structure provides in-home supports to be able to keep a parent home without financial regression. And now, can you imagine that? But if you did it, and people attacked it by saying, you're doing it for people that don't deserve it, and you can say, I'm not doing it for them at all. We're doing it for the sustainability of our nation, the strength of our economy, because everybody's going to come out a plus or a minus. And that's not a dead-end path. You might be a minus for a while. I know I was for at least, I lingered a little while in college, Doug. It was fun. I was definitely a minus then, but I got through it. But my point is that, like, what are we doing it for? And so to schools, we're starting behind. The starting stock in any business, if you're doing something that has any quality controls, needs to have any integrity, your raw steel matters before it's turned into a product, right? The quality of its content matters before you start trying to build it into anything. Actually, quite often, we test things thoroughly before we invest our craft into them. And so where's our starting stock in public education when we believe it's for the whole's greater than the sum of the parts, it's for our civic duty and responsibility and sustainability, And we're going to start at age 6. Right there alone is a great example of where we are failing. And so to public schools need to get better at admitting they are not experts in all the things that their hands are being put on. School administrators are scared to death to say, I'm not qualified to take that money. Because that home change that I mentioned, the dynamic of the home, parents aren't all home, kids still need support, and it's more important than ever. Schools are far more than what that state code says. School districts are supporting before school care, because parents have to go to work. After school care. Public schools that aren't mandated to start till 6 are desperately trying to figure out a way to start, or support, or get kids into programs earlier, because they know the consequences of it not. But that's a bit out of their reach, and they're not making it clear to everyone that that's a problem that needs to be tackled. And then what about all the other stuff? Can you imagine in the 1940s, 50s, saying to a parent, hey, we're going to get your kid a mental health counselor. I'm going to schedule their doctor's appointment for them. My nurse is going to tell you what's wrong with them. And we're going to make a dentist appointment for them. We're going to sit down and talk to them and make sure that they feel safe and secure and a sense of belonging. At the time, it made sense that a lot of that was left at home because it was being tended to at home. And we can't say we have bad parents now because it's not the same. But as that started to grow away from the home, and we started to see the consequences of it, on came what we call the mandates that eventually end up being unfunded mandates. And if I had my slides up, I would have dazzled you with pages of things too small to read. 82 pages of mandates in the state of Pennsylvania that none of which relate to that purpose. Well, they relate, but none of them are in the description of the purpose of public schools. I'm a superintendent who several years ago had to hire a school social worker. It was a mandate. Couldn't get PCCD, crime and delinquency money to support safety and security in our schools unless we had a social worker that we employed. And you know what I said? I don't really know how to hire a social worker. I'm not sure that I'm the most qualified person to even say, what exactly does a social worker in a school do? I don't know. That's what a lot of my peers don't say. I don't know. So I turned to Slippery Rock University that had a master social work program, asked their director to help me understand. Then I asked her to help me to write my job posting to delineate what I should make required versus preferred. And then I said, you know what? Will you sit on my interview committee? And they did, out of their master's program there. And I found that with their help, we found such a strong social worker that by the end of her first month working with us, the MSW program, Slippery Rock, was giving me 2 interns, 500 hours each, and it was like I had 3 social workers. Okay? But here's my point. Sounds like a good idea, Jeff. You did it well. None of that was part of the mandate. It's fine one. And that was left, when I say to me, to the district. I'd say we weren't qualified in that realm. Did you know the Grove City Area School District has a municipal licensed law enforcement department? Now, you all know that there's more often than not now police officers in schools. And I have a police officer in each of our buildings every day, carrying a sidearm, OC spray, handcuffs, fully marked as a uniformed police officer. I have an evidence room, an evidence safe, a MOPEC number, if you know what that is. And we have assault rifles in our schools. And a lot of people would say, like, yeah, you know, times have changed. And schools have become a place where these terrible things can happen. So now it makes sense to have police in it. Agreed. You know what part doesn't make sense? I'm the police chief. I'm not a law enforcement certified police chief. I'm an administrative police chief because I have my own police department. And I had to file a petition with the Court of Common Pleas to get that police department, to get that licensure. And that's why I know what a MOPEC number is. And I know that I have to have a safe for evidence because I have to protect the chain of evidence. Now, here's my thing is, There is the borough police department within what, a mile and a half, 2 miles? They have a police chief. They have a police department. They police the community, right? Back to, well, in the real world. Why didn't anybody stop and think that the school's a part of that community? And if putting an officer in every one of these buildings is necessary, why was it left to the school to have to do it directly, rather than take the expertise and put the resources into our established police department to get the funds necessary to build up their capacity to do what they do, and do it also where the kids come? And that's going to be a theme as I finish this up, is I'm going to quit calling schools schools, and I'm going to start calling them the place where the kids come. We need police where kids come. You would think the police department, but it's not. We need social workers. We contract with dentists. For all time, I've been the employer of a registered nurse, who, by the way, when hired, typically, stereotypically, is put into a teacher's contract and doesn't work with another person in the medical profession the rest of her 30 to 35-year career, but has a monopolized access to the kids where they come every day. Imagine something like the pandemic. What do you think a school nurse might have insight to earlier than so many other people when the children of the community are in there every day? Where are they going every time they don't feel well? And that nurse doesn't work under a physician directly, other than a physician of record that signs off our paperwork. So it's another example. The human development system has all these supports. I promise you this. If there are any educators out there purposefully, maliciously, and wrongly trying to indoctrinate kids, it is a response to fear, and they are outliers. It is a response to something that they fear, and they're combating extreme with extreme. Because the educators that I know, they're just trying to do the right thing, but they're also trying to figure out exactly what is that thing that we're supposed to be doing now. Because it's gotten lost in a bunch of stuff, most of which exceeds the scope of their licensure or exceeds the scope of their qualification. But they're doing it anyway. And you know why? Because they do love kids. They're committed to kids. And they know the kids that aren't cared for don't come to school ready to learn. If they don't feel safe, if they're hungry, if they don't feel like they belong, their brain isn't prioritizing the frontal lobe, it's the midbrain, and they're not ready to learn. So when they are making a child questioning things that contradict with our values, feel welcome, they're not trying to indoctrinate them, they're trying to educate them. And they have to feel like they belong. But in all these things that schools do, I'm telling you, we are consuming the human development system, not just applying the education system. And on top of it, we're starting it too late. And the confusion around it is causing fear, which compels blame. And what do you get from it as business leaders? What do you think happens when people are afraid to do the job? What do you think happens when you consider a pathway of an employment? If the labor that you need, that pathway seems threatening, seems uncertain, seems unstable, people don't follow the pathway. In our nation, we are at our greatest point of desperation with the educator pipeline. And guess what happens when that happens? If you don't have enough good teachers, it gets turned into, we don't have enough teachers. Do you see what word I took out? And now you have that fear. People start coming up with a bunch of shortcuts to make teachers. And you drop the good. You drop the qualification. Now you compromise the quality control yet again. And the system deteriorates further. So, what I believe is there needs to be a public effort to change the paradigm, the perspective, to challenge our society to see that there's somebody had it. I can't put a name to this quote. It takes a village to raise a child. Somebody has to put clear lenses on, it takes a dynamic set of skills to intentionally, for the good of the whole, commit to a human development system that has multiple primes. Now, Doug Thomas is here. I don't know how many of you know Doug. Doug owns, quite often, be a general contractor in a lot of projects, right? Construction company. I'm proud to say Doug was also an industrial arts teacher, as was I. And we went to the same school and had some of the same teachers. I just aged better. But I point to Doug because I know he'll get this, and I think you all will too. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Separations Act of 1913. I hope not, because that makes you a real nerd. But do you know that there's been a law in the books for a very long time in Pennsylvania to construct a building with public funds, you need at least 4 prime contractors. So do we all have a good sense of the difference between a prime contractor and subcontractors, right? 4 primes. So that, if I'm going to build a school building, I have to have at least 4 primes. My first year here, we built nearly a $40 million elementary school. We had 10 primes. And that could get a little confusing too. But why not just 1 prime, Doug?
I like it better.
Yeah, he likes it better. But those primes include mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and now general. It used to say heating and ventilation, electrical and plumbing, right? So let's just for a moment, try to justify that and say that, well, one, it could be don't put all your eggs in one basket. There's a level of expertise that just can't simply be generalized. And so we want to make sure that these critical areas of infrastructure that we're going to use public money to construct doesn't turn out to be a failed structure. So it's a protection. It doesn't guarantee that you're not going to hire a crappy electrical company, but it means that there's a purpose behind qualified expertise in certain areas that are critical. And then hopefully to be the electrician or the plumber, there's qualification category. At least in Allegheny County there is, right? Yeah, they got special certs down there. So anyway, now when you picture these 4 prime contractors coming to build a building, you don't imagine that they don't interact with each other, do you? It would be so much easier if that could happen. You know, like just let the electricians have the first 6 months, right? First of all, what are they attaching anything to? You know, and then the plumbers will come later. No, they have to plan the job. There has to be job phasing to that job, and they have to work together. Sometimes facing frustrations to coordinate their work because they're building one building whose infrastructure all relates one to the other. You got it in your head? Multiple primes of expertise working together with a plan. So what I'm saying about schools is, why am I a police chief? Why do I supervise a social worker? Why do I supervise a registered nurse? Why am I out looking to subcontract mental health? Last year, if you paid attention to school budgets, Governor Shapiro, and I applaud him for the intent behind this, got $100 million of added funding into mental health supports for schools. $100 million of additional funding in 1 year's budgets for mental health. Whether or not you agree or disagree with why everybody's so sensitive, there is a mental health crisis. And believe me, I see it every day. And it's not fake. So I don't disagree that kids can't learn if they're in crisis. And the law is making them come every day. So we need to care if when we make them come, they're equipped to learn. So this is where educators don't say, I'm not equipped to do this. They want to take care of all things children. I'll help you, honey. tell me this. And as soon as the kid tells the teacher the deep, dark secrets, their parents are angry. They're trying to indoctrinate your kid. They're actually just trying to get the kid to a place of comfort to be able to learn math. And they can't strip away from their ethos, their compassion for children. They can't tell them, I don't want to talk to you about what you want to talk to me about. And they're the lone prime. They're the only prime in the space. Governor Shapiro gave us $100 million and then required us to find in-school mental health support. You want to know another area of shortage of labor? I mean, how many of you want to go be a psychiatrist, an adolescent psychiatrist or psychologist? Can you imagine? There's not a lot of them out there, and I have to find them to be the sub. So, you bring subs in your part of the job, and the property owner, your client, the owner, is dissatisfied with the job. Who do they sue first, you or your sub? You. They don't look past you. That was yours. That's what society is doing to us. When you ask them, what's the purpose of school? It's foggy. But when you say, like, what do you think schools should do? They should teach English, math, science, social studies, and personal finance too, while you're at it. And come up with a couple others. Teach them that. But then, when they're mad about these other things happening in school, they didn't even think those things were your job, but now you're the prime in all that human development stuff, and they're blaming you. And I'm not saying that we don't want to be blamed, we don't want to be a part of it. We need to be a part of it. We understand children. We see the barriers to learning, but that doesn't mean we're the experts to break down all the barriers by ourselves. So let's start with the easy ones. Why is there an AHN hospital less than a mile away that if a kid gets so hurt or so sick in school, that is where they're going? But I can't bring an expert network of wellness and care and give them space where the kids come. Why is it that I need police in school, but I can't have the chief of our local district or the state police build the department to be where the kids come? Why is the Department of Health and Human Services so difficult to get to sit down with the Department of Education? Funding separations divide us. This comes out of your bucket, this comes out of your bucket, you're the prime. And as much as there's been a lot of disparaging thoughts around schools, which compels this idea of privatizing schools and supporting charter schools or whatnot, it is a reminder to me that when our state legislature comes up with something the kids need, I guarantee you, I know where they're going to put it first. They're going to put it on public schools. And that's the 82 pages of mandates. You know there's a mandate, Senator or House Representative Hal English of Allegheny County proposed a bill. It was a bill regulating what you can and can't do with sunscreen in schools. Michelle Brooks got a bill through telling us exactly to handle a tick. It includes in the bill, get a plastic baggie, put the tick in it so it's available to the parent should they want to have the tick tested. I don't even know if it works that way. Suicide ideation and prevention training, I understand that one. We need to be able to see the barriers, but we need multiple primes where the kids come. And that's my challenge to business leaders, is think of schools with the understanding of its purpose. And if you believe in that purpose, then you understand why it's qualified to be paid for by public dollars. And then if you've arrived at that, and it's going to cost us all money, then use your expertise. And what expertise do you have in whatever kind of business you're in? Number one, I'd say your systems thinking. Use your systems thinking. Use your leadership thinking. Use what successful leaders eventually find. If I continue to be driven by my ego, it'll only last so long. Get out of your own way. And we learn to surround ourselves with powerful people that complement our skill sets as we complement theirs and build the best package. Business leaders need to present that in a way that is not telling the schools you're failing, so you need fixed. It needs to be that your structure is aged out and it needs redesigned. That's what it needs, is redesigned. Without accusation of failure. Without wallowing in all the blame. It needs to be redesigned. So my challenge to our state legislature has been, because Senator Ahmet, if you're familiar with Senator Ahmet, passed a law a little over a year ago, in a state code bill, that formed the Commission on Education and Economic Competitiveness. I challenge you to look it up. They have a website, state. PA Commission on Education and Economic Competitiveness. That bill put a ticking timer on a 2-year effort that has 20 members combined of the state legislature, the House, and the Senate that are the commission. In law is written 40 agencies, all of which get one seat at the table called the subcommittee. The subcommittee consists of representation from the trade unions, Small Business Association, the hospital associations, all the P groups we call it, the state education groups, higher ed representation from the PACT, the state system schools, from the community colleges, and a private school representative. 40 subcommittee members, and here's their charge. To work over 18 months, the subcommittee, to gain stakeholder feedback, to help the commission, which is the lawmakers and the state secretaries, develop a new vision for public education in the state of Pennsylvania. And with that vision, to make recommendations for initial policy change. And I think one of the most privileged experiences of my career is the state contracted the National Center on Education and the Economy to be their facilitation leaders of that commission. And the National Center on Education and the Economy contracted me to be a consultant to the state legislature through that commission and to be a facilitator of it. And quite honestly, it scares the heck out of me. We've had our first 3 meetings with the subcommittee, and if you remembered some of the organizations I listed, these people do not speak the same language. And we're now broken down into 4 work groups. We've coded out the 13 goal areas that are in the statute. And those big goal areas include support Pennsylvania's future labor force demands, to assure paraphrasing, the capacity of leading successful lives as individuals and contributing to the nation. Early child education and care is one of them. Re-educating the workforce is one of them. And if you read them, you realize, wait a second, they're not just talking K to 12. They're talking birth to some gray edge out post 20 years old, 22 years old. And it is an attempt to make it, although very complex, a single system. And my fear is that people in your realm aren't going to be aware of this effort soon enough, and it's not going to change the paradigm. We need to embrace that schools are already far more than what that code says. We need to embrace that schools have been whipped into fearing, saying, I can't do this. So they're trying to do things that exceed their scope. You know how many professions you would get in trouble for acting beyond the scope of your licensure? Like, I dare you, go put on a shirt that says police and run down the road and say, stop police. You'll get in trouble, you know? Don't tell somebody you're a lawyer and offer to provide them legal advice and for them to find out. That's fraud. But as soon as the state puts money on something that they need kids to have and they pipe it through me, that's when I get a little snarky and I say, let me introduce you to Jeff Finch. I'm a shop teacher. And if you want me to build you a bookcase, you're on target. Now, I've gone to a lot of schooling since then and I've had experiences. And so I think I'm qualified to speak to school budgeting and whatnot. But I'm one superintendent will say I'm not qualified to interview and pick a mental health provider for children. I'm not qualified to supervise a registered nurse. I'm not qualified to be the authority direction to a social worker. And when I realize I'm not qualified, I think I do the right thing and I seek help, but what I allow the facade to stand that I still look like the sole prime. And you as respected leaders need to expose that without threat to schools, because there's one other analogy I'll give you, and that is the image of repairing the plane in flight. Like it or not, the plane of education cannot land to be rebuilt. So you know you actually need? You need both. This is an analogy I gave to a former Secretary of Ed when I met with him in Harrisburg several years ago, Pedro Rivera, and I love the guy. If you ever met him, he was honest, down to earth. And I said, Pedro, here's the problem. So long as we're trying to stay in the frame of the Code of 1949, so long as we're trying to stay in the realm of schools for what they are now and only tweak it, then we continue to just try to patch an airplane in the air. But when we compare ourselves to these other nations that built more modern education systems, I'd equate it to they're flying in a space shuttle. And what's the difference? The space shuttle, when it was designed from its start, had a different destination. Its destination was to get out of this atmosphere. So nobody took an airplane and tried to glue ceramic heat protection on it. There was a whole system that had to be rethought. But you could bet that there was a whole lot of engineering that went into the space shuttle that came from the evolution of the airplane. And who do you think flew the first space shuttle? I'd like to think the best airplane pilot, right? Maybe the best and the craziest, was the first one. But they built that space shuttle on the ground. They didn't even build it out of an airplane on the ground, let alone an airplane in the sky. They worked and worked and worked and were grounded. But it all started with a different destination in mind. So long as we're trying to tweak the existing system, we're not acknowledging the change in the destination that came from the change in so many things in the home structure and the economy. That has to be acknowledged. And I said to Pedro Rivera, I said, Pedro, we need to do both. We need to keep that plane in flight. And we need to keep patching it to keep it there. But as a Secretary of Ed, you need to find a way to get an incredibly knowledgeable team of broader, wider thinkers on the ground to build a space shuttle. And I said, but then the hard part comes. This is the state of Maryland. 5 years ahead of us on the commission work, similar to what PA is doing. It was called the Kerwin Commission. You can look that up when it came out. They redefined their education purpose and vision in the state of Maryland. And I envied it when it came out. But now they're in the implementation phase, and it seems like it's not going so well because transition is tough. And I said to Pedro Rivera, keep the plane in the air, build a space shuttle. And then the hard part comes, and he said, what's the hard part? I said, you have to transfer the passengers in flight. Now, I figured out how to do it with fuel. But then the good part comes. Once they're all on the space shuttle, what happens to the plane? Crash and burn, baby. Don't need it anymore. So when I met with Senator Ament before he put this bill forth on the commission, his chief staffer said, Senator Ament wants to burn the state code of 1949. I'm like, we can't burn it until we have something new built. Because that's just going to compel disastrous failure. We cannot land the plane. And so long as there's only educators inside the plane working on it, it's not going to change. So the final thought is the learning pit. And I think you could use this in any stretch initiative you give to your employees in whatever business you have. This is where it hurts not to have the slide, but I just want you to imagine. You want to grow. We often see like growing as going up scaffold or set of steps, right? You want to get from this level to this level. And that's a bit of a stretch. But that's not what really occurs when you're taking a challenge of growth. Spread them out. This is higher. And what's in between, I want you to imagine a pit. You familiar with this graphic? It's a learning pit, it's called. The educators, we have to call it the struggle pit. You learn when you struggle. That's how you build agency. I keep looking at you in the back because you cued me into agency. That's how you build agency, through grit and tenacity. But when you go into that learning pit, you're going to spend some time where if you lose your sense of direction, backwards looks up. Right? We go down, now we're struggling, and it's not going as easily and as quickly as we wanted. And then we start to look backwards, and it's awfully tempting because it looks up. So as leaders, think about people who deliberately try to turn people around in the learning pit in your organization. Think about people that don't want your change. And you haven't convinced them to want your change, but now you're forcing the change. And they're down in there. And because they're struggling, they feel lower. And you're pointing to that higher plane, saying, if we work together, we can get there. While there's others down there going, his idea is horrible. We're lower than we were before. Look where we were. And when you go back, guess what happens? Good luck trying to point to that specific higher plane again, because they think they proved that you couldn't get there. So you need to know that you have the strength in the learning pit to not lose the direction. And that is what is going to be our greatest challenge in education, I think, is this is complicated and hard. It is not as simple as fixing what we have. It's redesigning. And it'll never be done if left between the legislature and schools alone. It has to be done by the community, the citizens, and who better than some of the strongest systems thinkers in our communities that are our business leaders. And what would motivate you to do it? You need capable people. Otherwise, get ready, because you're going to be the school. After we not only wasted the developmental years up front, we wasted time till 18 and then say, now start to teach them something. So anyway, that, I apologize if I don't know if that sounds hopeful at all. But it's very meaningful. As I'm retiring in June. I'm going to continue to do some work with the state. I hope it comes out to be beneficial. But I hope that people who are respected in the real world strengthen their voice of purpose and reason and invest in schools. And I'm not just talking about money. Invest in partnership. Help us find the multiple primes that we need to tackle the problems of supporting children through their human development. Because I assure you, it'll be worth it. So any questions? Yes?
Of the 80 pages of mandates that you mentioned, and I'm asking for your opinion, what percentage of those mandates do you think are unnecessary or ultimately detrimental because they're using up potential budget that could be used for something else?
It depends on the context in which I answer that question. I don't see much in there. I joked about the ticks and the sunscreen. But I think, Mike Pence reminded me of this standing up here today. I don't know about all you, but that was so powerful. It reminded me of needing to keep human contact, because I wasn't a big critic of Mike Pence, but I think subconsciously I just labeled him into the machine of rhetoric. And I believed every word he said when he stood here in front of us. He's a man with a big heart, uncompromising faith, and I trust him with my children, and I'd vote for him just about anything after today. So my point is that I do think people are inherently good. And our lawmakers got these ideas from people they saw in need of something that was important to them. And so I don't think that it's just their context. I think it's not taking the time to figure out the system in which they need to work to solve the problem. And there's a danger to offloading something if you weren't sure where you were offloading it. Just because you got it out of your hands, out of your truck, so to speak, off your plate, doesn't mean it landed in a place that's good. And when you mix things up, that's where the detriment can come. Because now people think it's handled, and it's not. Other questions? Yes?
More of a comment. What you were saying totally resonates with me, especially that birth to 5. Because I'm going through that with my children now. I have a 6-year-old in kindergarten, I have a 2-year-old. And I remember being kind of shocked. It's hard to get a daycare spot. I work. And then when he went to half-day kindergarten, there were no before-school services or after-school. So it was like taking a step back from early childcare, because you're only in school 2.5 hours. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize that that's the right approach to be talking about that, I think. But I also think that as you're sitting around these round tables with different segments of the economy, including business leaders, a challenge I see where we need to evolve is we talk about women in the workforce. We make it very challenging for women to be in the to stay in the workforce. And if there were more part-time opportunities for women, they're very hard to find, other than like minimum wage jobs. That's a conversation I think that needs to be had about how can businesses better support from the family side. As schools come closer to supporting families, I think businesses also from the employer perspective should be incentivized to come up with creative solutions to retain women. And you mentioned like extended maternity leave as one of them, but I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And I searched the job market, and there's nothing for really part-time work outside of some very niche areas. So kind of just a comment.
Yeah, nobody ever argues that they believe that the early child is the most critical in development. And I just don't see anybody doing anything to change the focus on the earliest years. And it's about so many things, like giving the support to the family. You know, if an employer contributes to the cost of leave for a parent, they could say that at this moment in time, that's an expense on me. But if they're in it for the whole, and as the whole we figure out a way to level that playing field and support, then is it an investment that's worthwhile? The answer will come out yes. It's just getting there. You know, one of the things I forgot to mention, I don't know why you made me think of it, because it's not going to sound like it aligns, but competition. This is what scares me about the norms of that children are growing up in. Who's our competition? When we see all this political rhetoric, and I think last year when I was here, it came up, I shared the idea of the zero-sum game theory. We live in a zero-sum climate. Now, you're all better versed in business than I am, but I take the argument any day that we are too afraid of the comparison of the haves and the have-nots, and we're infighting in our nation. And that zero-sum mindset when it comes to schools and school choice, and the taboo around the politics around the word equity now, is that I should invest in the people that have the most capacity. That is so flawed in so many ways. But that idea of competition when it comes to schools, in our existing structure, there is not equity in school to school, in funding and whatnot. And as resources get harder to obtain, particularly teachers, schools with less are going to fall apart much faster. And every day there's kids losing traction. So I want to leave you with this. There's a Bedouin proverb. Does anybody know what the law of the jungle is? No? What's that? The law of the jungle, the Bedouin proverb speaks to this. I fight with my brother. You ever hear this? My brother and I fight with our cousin. My brother and my cousin and I fight with the world. Think about that. I'm half Italian and half Ukrainian. So I'll speak to the Italian side of my family, those of you that understand Italian culture. They fight with each other in their house. You know, I fought with my brother. I'm sure you don't have to be Italian for that to happen. But what happens when somebody comes from the outside and tries to take sides in your family fight? What does it do to your family? Fuses them together instantly. The problem with the Bedouin proverb is it implies that we're always fighting with somebody. And it's, if you ever watch like TED Talks or read Jonathan Haidt's work, it's H-A-I-D-T, he talks about this a lot. It's deeply embedded in our psyche evolution, in our evolution. And it's part of the survival mechanism. We always feel a sense of competition. And you can imagine where it comes from when people just had to survive. Is you want to hoard things. You want to have yours. You want to make sure yours is secure. Once you're secure and you feel other threats, you look to things that look more like you. Hence, my brother. And it's a cultural thing. And things that you can relate to more, you can form a tribe around. This is what makes gangs work. This is why you have uniforms in professional sports, and this is what makes professional sports so compelling to us. Tribal competition, team, my side against your side. And that needs to be satisfied. And so that notion of I fight with my brother until my cousin comes, and then we gang up on our cousin, and then we fight with the world. My point to that is I'm seeing that at the youngest stages of our work with children. They're not defining winning on a metric of a clear plan for success. They're satisfied by defining winning by creating a loser. When our politicians aren't talking about their merits and plans, but selfishly prideful in their ignorance to just tear down and show an enemy. How many people you think voted in our election against somebody rather than for somebody? I fight with my brother. My brother and I fight with our cousin. My family fights against the world. So in our nation, back to the very beginning, what is our purpose? Civic duty, sustainability of a nation, the whole, we all matter. That is a problem if we see our countrymen as not our team. So what has history taught us that pulls a divided nation together quickly? What? War. Great Depression, we were not an economic powerhouse. We were a melting pot. We are very separate tribes, tolerating one another to survive with work. And then the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. And people identified less as their nationality of origin. And what are some of the things we saw? Men were trying to enlist in the army and committing suicide if they didn't get in. It was an infusion of pride and unity in an instant. And what did it take? An outside foe. So when I was a teacher, or as a principal, one of my social studies teachers came up with a great, thoughtful assessment. George W. Bush. Some people say he went into Iraq prematurely. Were the WMDs there or not, right? My social studies teacher's question was, assume George W. Bush believed the conspiracy theory were true, that FDR knew the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor before they did, and he let it happen. I'm not saying I believe that. What I'm saying is, George W. Bush looked at the result. What might have compelled him from the lessons of history? At that time, we were facing recession. Was patriotism high by your account? Those of you can remember it? Before? No. People mocked George W. Bush. They mocked him, called him stupid, and he wasn't a very popular president in the middle of his term, right? He wasn't his dad. And we were in some real struggles, and I'm not promoting the conspiracy theory. But these kids in these classes wrote these essays about, well, his popularity wasn't strong. What do we know about FDR? One of the most popular presidents in American history. They had to change the term limits because of him. How often do you hear people saying bad stuff about FDR? He was the president when our nation found its position in the world, when we boomed through our economic development, and we became a powerhouse on the world stage in that war. And we still call that generation what? What do we call them? The greatest generation. What was so powerful about that lesson and that method of assessment was it showed the kids understood that time in history in a meaningful way. And I didn't say we were indoctrinating them, just saying that's why George Bush went into Iraq, whether it was right or wrong. But it made him very thoughtful about the influences of learning history and applying it to our current thinking and understanding. But what it didn't do a good job was helping kids understand it's a very real thing in all of us. If you're looking for a fight, it's just a fight. So change the word fight to competition. So long as we're trying to outcompete each other in our nation, we're in a zero-sum game. And we're on that slow wave regression while others are going up. And we're not paying attention to it. We have to pay attention to it. Yes?
We were mentioning all of your different roles and responsibilities. I think there's a couple that you missed over, like food service manager. You're picking food services and mending, like you're responsible for that. Also, you're the owner of multiple sports teams and stadiums. The transportation network. Pretty impressive transportation network that you're responsible for.
And we call it the cheese wagons.
Yeah. But I resonate with what you said about the zero-sum game. In fact, just earlier today, some Democratic strategists, when they're blaming like why they lost the election, and one of the things that came up was we were afraid to say something and be wrong in discussions, and that really like adds this zero-sum game mentality. So my question is like, what steps are you taking to make sure your teachers and your staff and all of those people that are involved, like how can you work to eliminate that mentality in your work?
I really appreciate that because it's hard, but I think there are things that we're doing. It's one, acknowledging that your job is hard and it's complex. It's another thing acknowledging that as your leader, I know you can't be good at it all. So let's not lie about it. Let's face the truth. Do your best every day. Raise your hand when you need help. But it gives some value to that shared leadership. That's one of the things I'm most proud of in Grove City that I don't know how broadly it'll be recognized is I'm proud of what I hear our teachers say. They're talking about initiatives that they are leading. Kids are talking about initiatives that they are leading. And trying to acknowledge that they're taking on Herculean effort, and we could share the leadership in it, and we don't have to be afraid of being imperfect. And then beyond that is fighting to bring in new support. So it's like I said, it wasn't a legislative thing that made it happen, but going to Slippery Rock and seeking expertise to do a better job of something gave the system support. And it didn't cost money. Another quick example, I think Ernie knows this, I don't know how many of you do, but this has been a 6-year effort. When I was at that meeting with Pedro Rivera, it was because I was invited to be in a cohort to learn about the world's highest performing jurisdictions in education. And the first thing that grabbed a hold of me was early child. And I surveyed our kindergartners for several years coming in and found that 50+%, usually 50 to 54% of each entry class for years came into kindergarten having never been in a daycare, organized daycare or preschool. And then when we started to ask the question, do you have a pediatrician? And do you know your pediatrician's name? we found that a large percentage of that 50 to 54% did not. And then I found that there was only one pediatrician, and a really good one, lucky for that, in our 90 square miles for more than 20 years. I mean, so my point is like, and what I learned in this cohort was do what you can do first. And so it just so happened to be that AHN was going through a buyout of our local hospital. And I'm like, that's a big, powerful network. You know, it took 4 different AHN hospital presidents till I finally got to David Tuppence, who was new when he came, to see a spark transfer when I pitched, let's partner to build a community-supported early child education and care center. And the other partner was the YMCA. Adam Cook of the YMCA, I don't know if you know these local names, is an amazing can-do attitude. And they ran a small daycare and preschool. And we pulled together all 7 daycare and preschool providers in our region and found that none of them had an open seat. So if we found a way to break down barriers to transportation and cost, there was nowhere to go. Adam Cook was the one provider that said, I'll take a shot at growing, scaling up with you, but everybody's afraid of the same thing. Couldn't afford the overhead of a building. This is where business people come into play, by the way. They couldn't even imagine trying to find a location. And they're afraid of their own labor requirements. This is where the government can help. A lot of strings attached to early childhood. It's incredibly complicated. And little help to navigate it. But you know what we had going on? We were just finishing up building a brand new school building, and I took a lashing for that. Yes, I did. And we were about to spend nearly $500,000 tearing down a building built in 1960, a double-loaded single corridor that was a kindergarten, first grade building right next to my office. And I believe the center column foundation sunk more than 6 inches before it opened. By the way, God's plan, Grove City was supposed to be a swamp. Just saying. So it sunk. And so this building was in rough physical condition from the get-go. And now here it is. All this time later, we're about to spend $500,000 to tear it down. And then I took a lashing for this, because I was quoted in a newspaper saying you can't save that building. No, I said you can't turn that building into a modern elementary school. But Adam Cook and the YMCA was willing to take a shot at scaling up, and one of their biggest hurdles was a building. I went to business leaders. I tried to get the hospital initially to use the unoccupied wing to start a daycare and preschool in the hospital. We're better. Kid gets hurt. Right there. But then AHN bought it and they had bigger plans. And so we found our way to the YMCA now leases that building for a 30-year lease for $10 a month. The strategy behind that is they're a nonprofit. And that lease is written in a way that it has an articulation agreement that it has to be committed to early child education and care. And the lease is written in a way that it broke the strings of the governmental logistics to me trying to fix a building, which cost at least twice as much. And to put it in their hands, it instantly saved the district almost $450,000 not tearing it down. And we still own the property. Now they can invest $3 million into a roof, mechanicals, and building envelope with the assurance that they can't be kicked out for 30 years. And the agreement also includes, if I can find them, a qualified care partner, that at least 4,000 square feet has to be dedicated. And AHN accepted. And the Buell Health Foundation gave us $850,000 in a joint grant application. And we have the specs, and we're getting through some red tape to get the 6 exam room pediatric clinic built right in a building owned by the district. When that happens, we will be the only public school district in the state of Pennsylvania that has a qualified health network in it, but it'll look like it's in the YMCA nonprofit's preschool daycare. Within 1 year of turning that building over to them, 170 kids in daycare starting at 6 weeks old through preschool. And so that's an example. So how? Show people the capacity of systems thinking. I don't like to say be a disruptor. That sounds too risky, like just want to break stuff. Be a systems thinker and find a way, but then turn that way into a model that compels designing it for a new destination. And that's what we have created here. And you want to know where it's talked about least in the circles that I travel? Grove City. It's been shared as far as California. It's been talked about at Harrisburg numerous times, and was asked to be a model at the Rural Health Convention in New Orleans last year. Very seldom talked about in Grove City.
This is a really important topic. It really is. I mean, like, I don't agree with Hillary Clinton on anything, except that it takes a village to raise our children. And so I think what he's doing here and what education is going through requires all of us to put our best minds together to figure out how do we raise up the next workforce. These are people coming your way. How should we raise these folks up? This is a big topic, and I would encourage you to think deeply about it. Think deeply about how you engage in this. This is sort of all of our future, all of been turned on. So I love the topic, and you are a person